directly that having a poor memory has not interfered with his accomplishments as a learner. He may not hold memories and knowledge long enough to retrieve them at will, but he does possess an ability to move that establishes, even in his own self-deprecating account of himself, his powers as a learner. If he complains that he hasn't retained much from books that he has read, he does argue that his faculty of judgment, along with his ability to conceive things, has moved him into the company of those whose books are taken up by the learned. It accomplishes this by leading Montaigne to contribute something of his own, his book of essays, and by leading him to discover that his opinions often coincide with those of the authors whose books he hasn't spent much time reading. He writes, and this is a longish quote, and partly the reason I'm quoting is to give you a flavor of the way that Montaigne goes about educating his reader by getting his reader to activate her judgment. And in fact, the essay on education is kind of wonderfully subversive because it is a letter to a woman, a noble woman, Madame de Foix, and he's telling her about the education of children on the occasion of her being pregnant. And he starts the essay by saying, you know, I'm sure you're going to have a son because you're too noble to start with anything else. I would have killed him if I'd been pregnant with my first child. He clearly did not know women when they're hormonal. But so he says this to her. But once he says it, it's kind of wonderful because the whole essay is subversive in the sense that he's activating her judgment, including her judgment of his cavalier comments about how, she'd only give rise to a male heir. And so I just wanted to give you a little flavor of the indirection that Montaigne uses in cultivating the very judgment that he's claiming is so important. He writes, "As for the natural faculties that are in me, of which this book is the essay, I feel them bending under the load. My conceptions and my judgment move only by groping, staggering, stumbling, and blundering. And when I have gone ahead as far as I can, still I am not satisfied. I can still see country beyond, but with a dim and clouded vision, so that I cannot clearly distinguish it. And when I undertake to speak indiscriminately of everything that comes to my fancy without using any but my own natural resources, if I happen, as I often do, to come across in the good authors those same subjects I have attempted to treat, seeing myself so weak and puny, so heavy and sluggish in comparison with those men, I hold myself in pity and disdain. Still, I am pleased at this, that my opinions have the honor of often coinciding with theirs, and that at least I go the same way, though far behind them, saying, 'How true!' Also that I have this, which not everyone has, that I know the vast difference between them and me. And nonetheless, I let my thoughts run on, weak and lowly as they are, as I have produced them, without plastering and sewing up the flaws that this comparison has revealed to me." That's the end of the quote. Here Montaigne's movement places him in the company of the learned. While his essays are peppered with the kind of unflattering remarks he indulges here with regard to his natural conceptions and judgment, groping, staggering, stumbling, and blundering as they are, he continues in those essays to write, to take his weak and puny, heavy and sluggish motions and direct them toward perfecting his clouded vision. Graceless though this motion may seem when compared with the swift movements of a cultivated memory engaged in the activity of replication, always very impressive, especially to those of us who read our lectures, it is the motion of a learner. And as a learner, Montaigne gets somewhere. Through the motions of his own intellect, he often lights on the same subjects as worthy authors. What's more, by the awkward movements of his natural faculties, he comes to some of the same opinions. What Montaigne has failed to acquire by way of memory, he has achieved through the activity of his own conceptions and judgment as these are expressed in his essays. In so doing, he demonstrates that he has internalized the knowledge of those who are learned, making that knowledge his own. In turn, the expression of his conceptions and judgment in the essays to be a better reader, not only of books, but of himself. For in following along behind an author saying, "How true!" he has conceived clearly what the author is saying, and he has judged its worth for himself. This takes Montaigne beyond the mere parroting that concerns him in the essay on pedantry. To see the truth in something is to go beyond the receptivity that parroting requires. Yeah, well, it requires the kinds of activities I mentioned earlier. Activities like questioning, analyzing, and offering critique. Through these activities, Montaigne has come to a judgment of what is before him. That judgment is actively responsive to what is given in the books he reads, and could presumably be reactivated by returning to those books even if Montaigne's memory has failed in its task. Furthermore, in discerning what is before him in content and in quality, Montaigne goes beyond what is immediately given and comes to know himself better. He is able to judge the vast difference between himself and the authors that he reads. But rather than cripple him, this judgment leads him to greater integrity in his writing. Unlike writers who hide behind the words of others, Montaigne writes to clarify his own thought. He says, "I do not speak the minds of others, except to speak my own mind better."